The first time Ilara saw Maya, it was across a crowded school auditorium during the winter concert, and she felt it, a jolt, a silent, resonant hum that was entirely out of place amidst the squeaky violins and off-key choir numbers. It wasn't just that Maya was beautiful, though she undeniably was, with her dark hair falling in a loose braid over one shoulder and eyes the color of rich earth. It was a feeling of recognition, a sudden, startling alignment, as if a magnet deep within her had shifted towards its true north. Ilara, sitting beside her husband, Mark, who was dutifully recording their 8-year-old daughter's flute solo, immediately compartmentalized the sensation. Weird static, she told herself. Tiredness. Life was a series of neatly organized boxes, the wife box, the mother box, the graphic designer working from home box. She was good at it. Her house was tidy, her daughter, Chloe, was loved and thriving, and her marriage to Mark was comfortable. It was a warm, well-worn sweater. It was the absence of conflict. It was, she sometimes feared in her most honest moments, the absence of a certain kind of electricity. Weeks later, the current found a conductor. Maya was the new art teacher, and Chloe, bursting with creative energy, had been assigned to her after-school pottery class. Ilara found herself volunteering to help, a way to get out of the house, to be more involved. It was in the art room, surrounded by the scent of wet clay and turpentine, that the hum became a constant, low thrum in Ilara's veins. Their interactions were initially just polite, functional exchanges about clay consistency and glaze firing. But then they lengthened. They'd find themselves the last two in the room, cleaning brushes, the silence between them not empty, but charged. "You have a good eye for color," Maya said one evening, watching Ilara organize the pastel chalks. "It's my job," Ilara replied, feeling oddly flustered. "No," Maya said, her voice soft but certain. "It's more than that. It's in the way you look at things. You see the potential, not just the object." The comment lodged itself in Ilara's chest. Mark saw the finished product, the clean logo, the balanced composition. He didn't see the messy, beautiful process. The current grew stronger. It was in the accidental brush of fingers as they reached for the same lump of clay. It was in the way Maya's laughter, a warm, unself-conscious sound, seemed to physically warm the air around them. It was in the way Ilara found herself thinking of a particular shade of blue-green and realizing it was the exact color of the shirt Maya had worn on Tuesday. She started noticing things about her own life with a new, painful clarity. The careful distance she maintained with Mark, the way their conversations orbited Chloe and logistics. The quiet loneliness that persisted even when they were in the same room. Her life, she realized, was a beautifully rendered illustration, but it lacked a heartbeat. The turning point came on a rainy Thursday. Chloe was at a friend's house. Mark was working late. Ilara had gone to the art studio to drop off a project Chloe had forgotten, and found Maya there alone, working on a personal piece, a swirling, abstract sculpture that looked like a storm given form. "It's called Unspoken," Maya said, not turning around, as if she'd sensed Ilara's presence at the door. The room was lit by a single spotlight, shadows dancing in the corners. The rain pattered a frantic rhythm on the skylight. "It's beautiful," Ilara whispered, her voice thick. Maya finally turned, her hands covered in a fine grey clay dust. Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "It's how I feel most of the time." The air left Ilara's lungs. The current between them was no longer a hum, it was a roar, a pull as undeniable as the tide. She took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the flecks of gold in Maya's brown eyes, to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Ilara," Maya said, her name a question and an answer on Maya's lips. That was all it took. The space between them vanished. Ilara didn't know who moved first, only that suddenly, her hands were on Maya's face, and Maya's lips were on hers. It was not a gentle first kiss. It was a conflagration. It was the releasing of a breath she felt she'd been holding for a decade. It was a feeling of coming home to a place she never knew existed. Maya's hand settled on her waist, solid and sure, pulling her closer, and Ilara felt every carefully constructed box in her life shatter at once. There was no guilt in that moment, no fear, only a shocking, profound rightness. The current finally had its circuit, and it illuminated everything. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, foreheads resting together, the world had irrevocably changed. The rain outside had softened to a whisper. Ilara started, but words failed her. How could she explain that a 5-minute kiss had held more life than her entire marriage? "I know," Maya murmured, her thumb stroking Ilara's cheek. "I've felt it since the day I saw you." Driving home later, the ghost of Maya's touch on her lips, Ilara didn't feel like an adulterer. She felt awake. Terrified, yes. Confused, absolutely. But awake. The illustration of her life was gaining a third dimension, messy and complicated and terrifyingly real. She walked into her quiet, perfectly arranged house. Mark was on the sofa, watching TV. He looked up and smiled his familiar, comfortable smile. "Good day, hun." Ilara looked at him, at the life they had built, and she felt the current, that beautiful, devastating current, still coursing through her. It was no longer just between her and Maya. It was now a turbulent river running through the very center of her own soul, and she knew, with a certainty that was both exhilarating and devastating, that nothing would ever be the same again. She had been dormant, and now she was alive. And the cost of that life was a choice she could no longer avoid. Weeks bled into a new, fragile reality. Ilara moved through her life with Mark and Chloe like a ghost haunting her own home. Her body performed the familiar rituals, packing lunches, attending parent-teacher conferences, sharing a bed, but her mind, her soul, thrummed with a secret life. Maya was the undercurrent in every thought, the secret melody beneath the daily noise. Their encounters became stolen, precious things. A coffee while Chloe was at soccer practice. A walk in the park where their hands would swing close, fingers almost, but not quite, linking. They talked for hours, and Ilara discovered parts of herself she had buried long ago. Her dream of painting, not designing, her fear of becoming invisible, her deep, unarticulated yearning for a love that felt like a conversation, not a monologue. "He's a good man," Ilara told Maya one afternoon, curled on the small sofa in Maya's sun-drenched apartment. It was her first time there, a space filled with thriving plants, half-finished canvases, and the scent of linseed oil. It felt more like home than her own sterile living room. "He's never been cruel. That's what makes this so hard. It would be easier if he were a monster." Maya took her hand, her touch both a comfort and an ignition. "This isn't about him being bad, Ilara. It's about you being alive. You can't negotiate with a lightning strike." And it had been a lightning strike. Every touch, every clandestine kiss in the safety of Maya's apartment, felt like a rediscovery of her own body. With Mark, intimacy had become a quiet, infrequent transaction. With Maya, it was a language. It was exploration. It was the feeling of a lock, long rusted shut, finally clicking open. The guilt was there, a cold, sharp stone in her gut, but it was often washed away by the overwhelming tide of rightness, of a hunger she never knew she possessed being finally, exquisitely fed. The carefully built dam of her old life began to crack under the pressure. Mark, ever pragmatic, was not blind. "You've been distant," he said one evening over dinner, pushing his peas around his plate. Chloe was upstairs, the thump of her music a muffled bass line. "Is everything okay? Is it work?" Ilara looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the kind, familiar lines of his face, the slight receding of his hairline, the utter lack of malice in his eyes. She saw the sweater of their life together, and for the first time, she felt its warmth as suffocation. "I'm just tired," she said, the lie ash in her mouth. It was the opposite of the truth. She had never felt more awake, and the exhaustion came from the colossal effort of pretending she was still asleep. The breaking point arrived on a Saturday. It was the school's annual art fair. Chloe, beaming with pride, had 3 of her glazed pots on display. Ilara and Mark walked through the gymnasium together, a picture of familial unity. And then Ilara saw Maya, across the room, helping a student hang a painting. Their eyes met. The current surged, a palpable thing that shortened Ilara's breath. It must have been visible on her face, the sheer, unguarded intensity of it. She saw Maya's small, private smile, a smile meant only for her, and she couldn't help but return it, a genuine, aching expression of love and want. She felt Mark go still beside her. He didn't say anything then. But that night, after Chloe was asleep, he came into the living room where Ilara was staring blankly at a book. "It's her, isn't it?" he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all emotion. "The art teacher." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Ilara could have denied it. She could have feigned confusion. But the current had rewired her. It demanded truth. She looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Yes." The word was a guillotine. It severed the pretense, the comfort, the entire foundation of their shared life. Mark's face crumpled, not in anger, but in a profound, bewildered hurt. "Why?" was all he could manage. How could she explain the color of the sky to someone who had never seen it? How could she describe the feeling of a missing piece clicking into place in a soul you didn't know was incomplete? I can't explain it in a way that would make sense to you," she said, her voice trembling but clear. It's not about you not being enough. It's about me, finally being enough for myself. I've been living a half-life, Mark. And I didn't even know it until I felt what a whole one could be. The conversation that followed was long and painful. There were tears, his silent and shocked, hers a messy mix of grief and a terrible, unburdened relief. They talked about Chloe, about the future, about the dismantling of a life built over 12 years. Weeks later, Ilara stood in the small, bright apartment that was now her new home. Boxes were stacked against the wall. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. It was terrifying. The guilt over hurting Mark, the ache of not tucking Chloe in every night, were wounds that were still raw. But as she looked out the window at the unfamiliar street, she felt it again, the current. It was no longer a disruptive force from the outside. It was internal now. It was her own pulse. It was the courage to face the mess she had created, the strength to build something true from the rubble of something safe. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Maya standing there, holding a single, vibrant sunflower and a bottle of wine. She didn't rush in. She just stood there, her eyes asking 1,000 questions. Ilara reached out and took her hand, pulling her inside. The door closed, not on a secret, but on a beginning. It's going to be hard, Ilara said, her forehead resting against Maya's. I know, Maya replied. But we'll face it. Together. As they stood there in the quiet of the new apartment, surrounded by unpacked boxes and an uncertain future, Ilara knew she had chosen the storm over the calm. She had chosen the complex, painful, glorious truth over the comfortable lie. The current between them had been the catalyst, but the life she was choosing to build now was her own creation. And for the first time in a very long time, she was exactly where she was meant to be.